and I am the community manager for Rainforest in Calgary. My colleague Amber Rowden should be online there. Not sure if she's made it there yet, but she will be. And we often have friends from Edmonton Rainforest online as well. So if you're there online, please feel free to go into the chat and say hello. So again, we're dealing with a hybrid setup kind of on the fly here. So if things, get a little quirky and the technology is not working, if those online could let us know in the chat, otherwise we won't be aware, or actually we can hear you, so you can unmute. We've got this cute little owl here that chirps and talks to us and is going to follow our voices around the room, so it should all work out very well. You're late, Alan. I'm teasing. Okay, so we're going to get started right away because we have a lot to cover today. So sorry, I'll have to kneel down here to use the screen, but prior to getting started, we just want to acknowledge the lands that we work to live and play upon. For those of us in Calgary, that is the territories of the Blackfoot Nation, the Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, and Tsuut'ina Stoney Nakoda Nations, and the Métis Nation Region 3. If you're in another area of the province or the country or the globe for that matter, feel free to make a land acknowledgement of your own in the chat. So just a quick intro to the rainforest. If you're new to are you new to the rainforest? Anyone in person new to the rainforest? Welcome, warm welcome. We'll get to connect with you after the presentation. And online, please feel free to share your LinkedIn profile in the chat, and folks there will connect with you.
What does it take to realize an idea or for a seed to sprout? At Rainforest Alberta, we know the answer is rooted in trust. Traditionally, Albertans have cultivated their ideas in established systems. Inputs that don't fit these systems are weeded out. Opportunities for growth are missed. But now, Albertans want a dynamic landscape that can evolve organically, like a rainforest. At Rainforest Alberta, we believe a culture of trust is the fertile soil where ideas grow. Our budding innovation ecosystem is a network of relationships pulling each other up as they push forward in their own field. Trust breaks down barriers. An open, inclusive network increases collaborative innovation. Successful breakthroughs inspire new ideas. A cycle begins. Rainforest Alberta is a movement to amplify trust by cultivating honesty, inclusion, and accountability. How? Our social contract holds us accountable to demonstrate trust across the province. We meet to have honest conversations around collaboration.
Together, our future can be evergreen. Sign the social contract today. We've seen that video enough times that for most of us, we know how it ends. It ends in
more special.
Sometimes the audio doesn't work, and Amber narrates, and she's an actor, so she does a really good job of that. Anywho, we go with the flow. So please do sign the social contract if you haven't previously. It is the foundation of this movement, the rainforest, and it's 10 values that we agree to live, work, and play by. There'll be a QR code coming up. Sorry for this screen situation here, folks, but I think you get the gist. We like to make mention of the 6 pillars that that make up the ecosystem, and this all comes from the rainforest analogy. So for those of you who are unaware, the rainforest analogy comes from a book published back in 2012 called Rainforest Building the Next Silicon Valley, and it's a very deep and interesting analogy that our friend Jim Gibson could probably speak to much better than I could. He's here today. For those of you online, I didn't necessarily mention, but you should already know that we are on the campus of SAGE. So thank you to the Catalyst here for hosting us today in person. It's great to be here. So these are the pillars. We measure them each year. We just wrapped up our scorecard assessment, which measures the pillars a couple of months ago. If you'd like to check out the results of that survey, they can be found on our website under the, I believe, About Us tab. Don't quote me. So for those of you online, the best way to make the most of this hour is to turn your camera on and get to know each other face to face. Use the direct message feature if you'd like to chat with folks that you see online there. Obviously, for those of us in person, we will do that in person. Once you sign the social contract, you gain access to our Slack workspace, and that's where we can have more connection and conversation after the hour is complete. And we do capture the chat from today, so don't panic. You can catch it on the workspace there. And we do record these sessions and they will be placed on the YouTube channel, Rainforest Alberta, on YouTube. We like to highlight a value of the social contract every week. We highlighted this last week, but I thought we'd just stay here because a big part of today is around this value of sharing. And so I'll let you read that. I don't need to read it for you, but in the essence of sharing today, we're going to be learning all about tech stewardship. I know many of which in this room have taken the course. I'm currently enrolled in it. It's been a great experience, and Mark Abbott is here to share more about that. There is the QR code if you have not signed the social contract as of yet. I kind of feel like a kindergarten teacher kneeling. So for those of you who aren't aware, just a really quick plug for our new digital platform, Digital Rainforest, you might call it. The platform is called Inkly. It's a startup out of Victoria who also have offices here in Calgary. This is where we can share our curiosity and our generosity by asking questions. So I like to challenge everybody every Wednesday to think about their morning's work, what went on for you today, and what curiosities did you have? I'm sure there were many. And if you feel brave enough, head onto the platform and post a question. You then have access to the entire community, and your question will be matched through algorithms to folks who are uniquely positioned to answer your questions. So they will have the knowledge and experience you are looking for. We are looking for feedback on this platform right now. So if you'd like to provide that, please get in touch with Amber or myself, and we'll connect you with the Inkly team to provide feedback. I'll also make a really quick mention that we're hoping to have an anonymous feature on the platform because we have had some feedback that folks are maybe a little shy to be posting questions that they may not want to attach their name to, but we want to maintain the integrity of the community aspect of the platform as well. So we're playing with some of these features and chatting with Inkly, and your feedback's really critical in keeping that going. All right, you're going to have questions after this session today. So scan this code, get on the platform, and share your questions with everyone there. I'm sure they'll have similar curiosities. Okay, so we'll stop sharing and I'll stop talking because Mark has a full hour ahead for us, and we're going to do this in hybrid format, obviously, so it's going to be interesting. We have Greg Hart here, founder of Inception U, Future Cities. Much more to his bio than that. Jim Gibson, of course, everybody knows as the chief catalyst here at SAIT and the co-founder of Rainforest. They're going to be partaking in this conversation with Mark, who is the founder of Tech Stewardship, and he'll tell you more. Mark, I'll let you talk a little bit more about everyone's background and turn it over to you.
Wonderful. Can you hear me okay in the room there? Yeah,
we can.
Online. It's good. Yeah. How many people are in the room? Just to give you a sense as well too.
350.
Perfect. There we go. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here with you virtually today. And as Brigitte said, today we're going to give you a chance to actually kind of an overview or introduction to tech stewardship. I know some of you are doing the program, but for some of you, this will be brand new. And in part of that overview is actually kind of contextualizing tech stewardship. So it's actually been co-created by a large number of leaders and organizations, including, I'd say, like Calgary's been extremely well represented. So, Jim and Greg from Rainforest and Inception U, and SAIT, is really kind of been involved in both the formation of tech stewardship and now the rollout of it. Center for Social Impact Tech. James is here from Mount Royal, Suncor. So it started out as a Canada-wide initiative that's actually now going international. And I would say, Calgary has had sort of as much, if not more, contribution than any other geography in sort of creating tech stewardship and in continuing to evolve it. So really exciting to kind of paint that picture a little bit today. We're also going to get into a little bit of a demonstration of the practice of tech stewardship. And so Jim Gibson's volunteered to be sort of the guinea pig for that, to do a little bit more of a live kind of dialogue with me about to explore some of his tech stewardship experience. And we're going to use that kind of as an example before we go into giving actually everyone in the call a chance to practice tech stewardship ourselves. And so that's going to be a chance to actually have a peer-to-peer conversation, either paired online or in person there in the room. And then we're going to talk more about, sort of wrap up with a talk about next opportunities. And that's where hopefully we can bring a bit more of a Greg into the experience there too. We were realizing in the planning of this that actually an hour goes really quickly, and to try to get space for all three of us was going to be a little bit tough. So I'll try to move us along and bring Jim and Greg into the conversation in those points. And beginning with the end in mind a little bit, what we're going to be experiencing today is actually kind of like a bit of an experience of tech stewardship practice. For those of you who haven't had a chance yet, there's a practice program that you can access through Mount Royal and Rainforest and Center for Social Impact Tech that actually helps build more of a foundation for this type of practice. So if you like what you're kind of experiencing today, at the end, we're going to give you an opportunity to register for this program for free for the upcoming summer presentation. And we also run weekly drop-in practice sessions, like half-hour sessions that are kind of similar to what you'll experience in this hour. So again, if you like what you see in this, what you experience over the next hour, there's going to be these two opportunities for you to kind of immediately follow up afterwards. I'm going to introduce myself a little bit now, and when we start to interview Jim, I'll give him a chance to kind of introduce himself. And we talk to Greg later. We'll get some of his background as well. So we'll kind of work our intros into the flow here. I'll spend a couple more minutes on my intro because it kind of also helps explain a bit of the context of where tech stewardship came from. So I'm a mechanical engineer by training and spent almost 15 years in consulting engineering. And in that time, pretty typical in that industry, it was really kind of head down, like what's the next project? What's the next, thing we need to build? And things would kind of come up day to day, like things that would sort of bother me or would rub kind of the wrong way. But we were always so focused on the next thing, and no one was ever really taking time to actually talk about these tensions. And so we just kind of plowed on. Eventually, I started volunteering with Engineers Without Borders in Vancouver at the time. And all of a sudden, there was a group of people who were asking, like, wait a minute, what's the world you want to see? And how's your work contributing to this? So I kind of find community, sort of like, I think the Rainforest community or the Center for Social Impact Tech communities of like-minded people that are asking these bigger questions and supporting each other. That led me to move to Toronto and join the executive team of Engineers Without Borders. And then it was while I was at Engineers Without Borders that the idea of launching a change lab, which became the Engineering Change Lab, which was looking at how the world was changing and how the engineering profession needed to kind of evolve itself to live up to its potential. As we started on that path, what we realized was there was an even bigger story of society's relationship with technology and how we basically avoid winding up living in a Black Mirror episode or a Terminator Matrix kind of future. And so for the last 8 years, there's been this incredible, first through the Engineering Change Lab and now the broader Tech Stewardship Network, hundreds of leaders and organizations who have really come together to co-create tech stewardship and some of these offerings around tech stewardship. So it's really being formed as shared infrastructure for this larger movement. And again, there are a lot of players within Calgary who were instrumental in both creating the infrastructure and continuing to evolve it. And now it's starting to scale globally. In a lot of our drop-in practice sessions, we have people from all over the world now. One of the questions, and we actually often run this as an exercise, and it's the first practice cycle in the program, is, what do you think the default trajectory of humanity's relationship with technology is? And we get people to place themselves on this Terminator to Star Trek kind of scale. And the reason we start with this is because in a lot of settings, this kind of, there's almost like an underlying belief that more innovation, more technology is necessarily a good thing. But when we stop and think about it, we've all been to the movies and seen the TV shows where, these kind of dystopian futures, whether it's Terminator, Matrix, WALL-E, Black Mirror. And when you stop and think about it, if we wind up in one of those futures, we will have technologically innovated our way into it. So clearly it's not just about more innovation, more technology. We also have to get better at making sure that technology and innovation is taking us to our world we want to see. And we go into this in more depth where we kind of, talk about, actually we need to be both optimistic and pessimistic, and we need to bring the best of both those mindsets. But when we were kind of on our formation journey and we were asking this question early on, we said, okay, what's it going to take to make sure that we're bending the arc of technology towards this more optimistic future? And what we saw is, public awareness around issues with technology is really important. Policy is really important. But if we don't get upstream into the sort of the mindsets and the behaviors of the people that are creating and applying technology, the entrepreneurs, the engineers, the computer scientists, then the public awareness and the policy is always going to be chasing a horse that's long since left the barn. And so that's really where tech stewardship came from as a professional identity, orientation, and practice, which is basically just about how we all come together to navigate these tensions. Like, how do we create a world that's, technology that's more purposeful, responsive, inclusive, regenerative, Well, who wouldn't want those things? But it turns out in practice that it's not that easy. There's competing priorities, competing perspectives, competing values that actually get in the way. And so what tech stewardship is basically, creating this space for us to figure it out together. How do we actually find those opportunities in our day-to-day work to bend the arc of technology towards good? And so part of that is understanding the nature of technology, and that typically within technologies, we often encounter these value tensions. So a classic one that, is pretty common that we all experience is around our cell phones, and we probably all value to a certain extent convenience, but we also value our privacy. And when we're flipping through that new app and, agreeing to the terms and conditions, we probably have those, if you're like me, you have that moment and you're like, oh man, but I don't have the time to do this and I need to kind of move on. So there's the tension within me that intersects with the way these technologies have been created and scaled to make it easier or harder to sort of privilege some of those values that we interact with. So the essence of tech stewardship is really about finding both and opportunities within value tensions. So as tech stewards, we get better at noticing these tensions around technology, naming them, reflecting on them, and finding ways to actually take both and action. Like, what's a way, if I'm a designer of cell phones, that we can actually achieve the best of privacy and convenience? And there are all sorts of different examples that come up in every context around these tensions, and not just pulling on one side of the rope, but sort of saying, wait a minute, it doesn't have to be an either or, we can find more productive ways forward. All right, so that's kind of a lightning introduction to tech stewardship. If you do the practice program, if you kind of come in deeper, you get we spend more time building out a foundation. But what we thought would be great here today is actually to interview a tech steward. So probably several of you know Jim Gibson from either SAIT or the rainforest community. I had the privilege of meeting Jim several years ago, and in my mind, Jim's been a tech steward since long before we were using that term, and has an incredible early career. Hopefully, some of you read his book, Tip of the Spear, or looking forward to his new book. And I listed on here just some of the things he's currently involved in, because his resume would have taken like multiple slides. But what we thought would be fun today was actually to kind of take Jim back more to his origin story. Because with tech stewardship, we like to get this sort of relatable stories of like, this time I found attention in my work, and how what I did with that and where I went. And so, Jim's story takes him into some pretty impressive contributions, obviously, as an author, as like a high-level change maker. So my challenge to Jim when we were prepping for this session is, let's go back earlier in kind of your origin story as a tech steward, and can you share a story from that time that might be kind of helpful and instructive? So Jim, I want to throw it over to you and say, we'll kind of retract this question that we explored a little bit last week. Can you tell us about a time when you experienced one of these kind of technology-related tensions in your earlier career, and what that looked like, and what kind of came out of it?
Thanks, Mark. As opposed to when I first met Greg Hart, that tension of, this smart, one of the smartest guys I know.
Keep going.
So thanks, Mark, and thanks for the introduction. This was a really challenging question. It was peeling an onion that I hadn't peeled in I would say decades. When you asked me about some of the early tensions and thinking that I had, and it took me a bit to reflect, and then it hit me like a ton of bricks when I really came to me what was the genesis tension for me in my earliest part of my career. And without telling too long of a story, it started with my second job. I was a part of an organization's Canadian Pacific, CP Rail, who and I'm talking about the early 90s, had invented technology that was the precursor to email. So we have an organization, CP Rail, all across Canada and a part of the US. And it was way ahead of its curve. It's a group called Computers and Communications. It was an extraordinary group. It was right on the leading edge, and they literally had invented the earliest forms of connectivity between its people all over the field, running trains. And I joined it as this wet behind the ears, 20-something-year-old in the classroom education team that was responsible for bringing technology training all across Canada. And it was like, I was the ultimate imposter syndrome, but it was really cool because I was young and knew a fair bit about tech at the time, and so I joined this team. And this is an absolute true story, and I think I actually tell it in Tip of the Spear. Was my first time standing up in front of a class, and it was classic classroom training, and it was green screen. Any of you remember green screen? We were teaching email on 3270 terminals, and that dates me hugely. But
Were there punch cards?
they were just past that. And so I'm standing up in front of a room, rows and stuff, and we're teaching something called Merlin, which was the precursor to. Sure. Somebody read. It's like, now you know all that. So I'm teaching electronic mail, and I'm standing up, and I'm lit. This is the greatest thing I've ever happened in my life. And I meet everybody from admin folks to people working order desk to running trades. So the guys, it was primarily guys in the running trades with no word of a lie, breaking grease on their fingers, and they've been called in by their boss to go, let's learn about this thing called electronic mail. And I'm this 25, I think at the time, 26. I'm going, this is the coolest. And so I launch into my typical speech. And we start going down the curriculum. And this guy, and I'm not embellishing it, it's clear as the day to me. He's at the back, he goes, Jim, and we're doing the early parts of setting messages or something. And he says, Jim, I just have to interrupt you. And I go, what? I forget his name. And he goes, this is fantastic. And this will change the way we engage our workforce. I'm like, great, I got him. And he goes, so tell me how many jobs this is going to replace. And I'm a 25-year-old kid. And the feeling in front, it was my first class, and it was smacked in the head. And I never, ever forgot that moment where the notion that technology, as we introduce it, is never neutral. It's a never neutral situation. And that's why when Mark talks about tensions, in that very moment, I think it changed every part of my career. I never assumed that the introduction of new technologies was neutral. And so neutral both being positive or negative, but it was never done glibly. And I think we often as technologists, we get a little glib about assuming that the rest of the world sees the future or is up to speed. And our job is to steward and bring people along on that journey and give them. And so anyways, I struggled that class. I was shattered. I don't think I was married at the time, but I think I went to the bar. I was shattered. And I was like, I have no idea what does it mean to be in the opposite side of change and being felt like and it was just a simple comment. And the gentleman who said it was super respectful. He was super calm. But he recognized that this change wasn't being introduced in a way that was meaningful to him as a human being. Never forgot it. And I think Tip of the Spear and what I've done and meeting Greg and the work that I've done with the rainforest stem from that moment. So Mark, thank you for bringing me back to my PTSD, and it was really, and I really appreciated you unlocking a bit of that memory. So thank you.
One thing I really appreciate about that story is it's kind of timeless, right? Like you're talking about a cutting edge technology in the 80s, right? I mean, you could imagine that same vignette kind of playing out today with generative AI or, in the change management process in some organization, this idea of, many of us probably in the rainforest community in particular, right, have a natural kind of valuing of innovation and change and belief in its potential. But sometimes we forget if we're in communities of people who tend to lean that way, that that there can be these other perspectives. So Jim, I'm curious, like you noticed this tension, you've been kind of going into it throughout your career. At the time, what kind of changes or actions were you able to take, kind of like as you were grappling with that back at the time?
Yeah, it was great follow up. And just by the way, I just came from Dean's Council, which is our weekly meeting with all the deans at SAIT. And generative AI was smack right in there in the first. I'm thinking about having this conversation now And you're absolutely right, Mark, this is absolutely timeless. Deans are going, WTF. But they're embracing, but they're recognizing the language of change. Anyways, the very practical thing I did was I carved out time and space in any interaction that I did in terms of training and education to the understanding of how are we showing up? How are we showing up about how we feel about the technology? And when we were doing curriculum design for some of the new technology, and I was there for a few years, we instigated this kind of rule that the first 20 minutes of any technology introduction course or training program was about showing up. How are you showing up today about what we're about to do? And I'll tell you, it changed the whole way we thought about the way, and some of the programs, some of the courses that we taught got completely off the rails during that session, because half the room were showing up saying, "Well, somebody forced me to come here. I really don't want to be here." And we had instead of running away from it, we embraced it, and that changed everything.
Well, it's interesting because I think to myself, one of the things that I would want to share with the group that were coming in for that, especially when that's a sort of a presented feeling, is talking about enablement, because it's not always about replacing people, but it's also like, it's kind of like helping them prepare for the future. Because, you can talk about where you want to go. It's not always about eliminating people, because it's also about, helping that business grow to the next level, which also enables some of the people that are there to go on to those next levels. Like, it's sort of a regular sort of lifestyle trajectory to get to the next phase. And I think, really helping people understand that a little bit about where we're going, how we want to bring people along with us, and really, while it does sometimes reduce the number of people that are required, there's also, generally sort of like hand-in-hand progression of people along the way together, because the machines can't necessarily do it without us. So.
Yeah, that's I can see a thumbnail within a thumbnail of who was speaking there, but that's perfect. And it's, I think that whoever was speaking, that this example Jim gave is so great, because, and it's the kind of example we look for in tech stewardship, because it's a timeless challenge and not an easy one to fix. But Jim and his team at the time instituted a very simple but very powerful step, right? That is kind of relatable. Like, so we can start with this kind of space of actually just making space to see what the other values and perspectives, like what are the emotions that are coming up. And then to the gentleman who was just speaking there, that opens up, the space for kind of like, it's not the fear kind of trigger, like I got to shut this down, or I have to not listen to these people, or they're going to rain on my parade. You open up the actual space to have this kind of deeper dialogue. And so I want to give everyone a quick chance to experience this before we talk more about it. So one of the meta tensions we introduce in tech stewardship is actually drawn from Jurassic Park. Remember in Jurassic Park, the quote was essentially, we were so busy wondering, can we do it? We didn't stop to consider, should we do it? And so one of the meta tensions that kind of comes up with tech stewardship is this, can we do it? Should we do it? Thinking. And our sort of proposition is, you need both. You need the best of both. We know what happens when you only focus on can we do it to the exclusion of should we do it. Everyone gets eaten by a dinosaur or equivalent. And you know what happens when we only think about should we do it, like analysis paralysis, nothing happens. So a lot of it is actually creating the time and space and breaking down silos. So those different parts of ourselves, the can we do it and the should we do it in ourselves, and the different kind of dominant communities, like an innovation community that's very can we do it, maybe a policy community is much more should we do it. How do we create the spaces to make sure we're getting the best of both of those? And so in the program, we actually break that down into 4 behaviors of tech stewardship. How do we seek purpose? How do we take responsibility? How do we expand inclusion? How do we work to regenerate? And as we peel into those, we talk about the tensions that happen within those and between those in the practical day-to-day world, because who wouldn't want more purpose and inclusion and regenerative systems? But in the real world, it gets tricky, right? Like, let's take responsibility. If I'm more of a can we do it person, it's like, hey, if I've got the ability to make something better, it would be irresponsible of me not to act as quickly as possible, which is not wrong until you overdo it to the exclusion of, if I'm more of a should we do it person, when I think about responsibility, it's like, wait a minute, if I'm going to make all these big changes, I better make sure I've thought through everything before we do anything, which is not wrong until you overdo it. So tech stewardship is kind of, when you get into the deeper foundation, is helping sort of see these tensions, these archetypes of tensions that tend to come up. Now, that's throwing a lot at you in a very short amount of time. And again, at the end, I'm going to give you an opportunity if you want to get into the practice program or the drop-in sessions. But just kind of stepping back from that a little bit, I want to give everyone a chance to just try out kind of like even a light version of what this looks like. So taking a pause in our week to reflect, share, and support each other in our kind of journeys of tech stewardship. So in a moment here, I'm going to give you a couple minutes to gather your thoughts, a couple minutes of quiet reflection to gather your thoughts around a tension or question that's kind of relevant to you. Then we're going to break into pairs. We're going to go into Zoom breakout rooms online, or you're going to stand up and find someone in person. And you're going to spend about 15 minutes kind of just exchanging that question or tension and kind of getting some feedback from another person. And then we'll bring it back and debrief a bit. And just two simple rules for this. One is to keep confidences. So someone's talking about a tension in their current work, like, my job at XYZ. The rule is you can't share that with anyone else with anything that could identify the person or the company or organization unless you have permission. And that's important because we need people to be able to feel free to like exchange in kind of a vulnerable way. And the other is to maintain sort of a curious and not judgmental mindset. So instead of giving distinct advice or kind of passing judgment, asking kind of like more open and curious questions, we find is a better way to support practice. So what I'm going to invite you to do now, and I'm going to set a timer so that I don't shortchange you this. I'm an extrovert and periods of silence are a bit painful for me. So I'm going to set a timer in a moment and give you 2 minutes to just gather your thoughts on a question or tension you want to focus on. You may want to focus on a tension you're currently experiencing in your work, something that was in the news. Maybe it's about generative AI or the push to net zero. Or it could be a past aha moment like Jim's, where you're kind of going back and thinking about something in your earlier career. There's no really right or wrong here, but just hone in on something you'd like to share with someone else. And now I'm going to give you 2 minutes to just kind of organize your thoughts, and then I'm going to bring everyone back, and then we're going to give you some instructions about the peer-to-peer show. So I'm starting the timer at 2 minutes of silence to organize your thoughts.
Is somebody going to break the online group into groups?
I will, yeah. We'll get the breakouts in the next step here.
Thanks, Mark.
Okay, perfect. All right. Welcome back, everybody. It's an interesting how the dynamics of the online rooms and the in-person are always interesting. So would love to just get we don't have a lot of time because we have some wrap-up things, but would love to get from just a couple people who are willing to share what you found interesting or useful from your conversation. So it could be something your partner shared you found interesting, a new insight you had, a question you're holding, really anything. If you're online, you can throw it in the chat. Whether you're online or in person, raise up your hand. Would love to hear from 2 or 3 people, remembering to keep confidences and to keep in that curious, non-judgmental space. And if I can be so bold, I'm feeling really bad about not about an hour was too little to leverage all the amazingness of Jim and Greg. Greg Hart, I don't know if you're there, but if you'd be willing to kick us off with the reflection, that would be great.
I left, Mark.
Too much tension.
That's right. I think that one of the things that came out of my conversation was that the reminder that adaptive space that we're talking about that exists between just mechanically responding to something instead of meaningfully responding to something. And I mean, at inception, it's like needs to go on the wall, meaningful, not mechanical, right? Like it's really a key thing. And the point is, I mean, it shows up in technology, but it also shows up in non-technological situations. Like this is a more general theme in life that, you know, the conversation we're having is that, you know, somebody gets instructed to go to an event, for instance, because, hey, the people who are making those decisions say this is a good event for you to go to. And then you show up at the event and find out that, oh dear, this is really not a good place for me to be, and I'm not comfortable to be here. But it's the same process, right? Like it's just a mechanical response to a power, which is what exists with technology as well. We just kind of go along with it rather than, you know, sitting in that adaptive space for just a moment and going, I should maybe check and see, you know, like Stephen Covey used to say, you know, responsible is like two words. There's the response and then able, and there's a space that you can use, you know, to deal with that. So, yeah.
I love that. I mean, it brings me back to that, you know, my first career of 15 years of consulting engineering. Like no one ever paused to like encourage that kind of reflection or step back. We're just in kind of mechanical mode. What's the next thing? And so just, you know, with these drop-in sessions that we run every week, you know, sometimes we get 60, 80, 100 people from all over the world coming in, and just the power of someone inviting you to pause and connect and reflect. James, did you want to unmute and share your reflection?
Yeah, we had a great conversation, Tran and I, offline. And I think what we distilled it down to is, I think we're really good at, with technology, of developing stuff and knowing what we want from that stuff, but we're not really very good at understanding the unintended consequences that can sometimes come from introducing disruptive technologies.
Yeah, I love that. There's a great, we introduced a bunch of resources in the Tech Stewardship Practice Program to, you know, go further in some of these themes. And one I love is there's this podcast called Should This Exist? And I'll throw it in the chat here as well too. And what it is they actually interview people who were in the early stages of some big new technological innovation. And they go back and say like, hey, should this thing even exist? You know, like, should we have done this? And inevitably the answer is not no, it's we should have, but we should have done all of these things that we didn't think about, right? So in a lot of ways, tech stewardship is like trying to get the you know, reduce the number of, like, if we can individually and collectively practice tech stewardship, we're hopefully minimizing the oh wait a minute, we should have that kind of come up in the future around these new technologies. That's excellent. Maybe time for one more, just so we have time for also the wrap up. Is there someone online or in the chat who want to share one more reflection? Can be on these themes or something totally different. Oh, if we have a shyer group, we can go on. Normally what we do in our weekly, oh, we got Martin. Go for it, Martin.
Yeah, I was just going to say it was an interesting conversation in our group, but it was really about and it's probably slightly off topic, but I just got the impression that when you're founding and building a company and you're trying to solve these problems and you're just trying to do it all yourself, and it just becomes overwhelming, and then you just get to this point where you just can no longer do anything because you've just got this never-ending loop of lists that's going round and round and round in your head. And I definitely think that ability to just step back, maybe, but you just feel guilty. I think there's that guilt feeling you just have all the time. Well, I'm not working. I'm thinking. Thinking's not working. I should be working. I should be producing. It's just like, no, it's all about thinking, right? Yeah,
that's excellent. And Martin, I think in particular, like for innovators and entrepreneurs, like the number of competing priorities and tensions, right? And I think tech stewardship, it's for, you know, bending the arc of technology towards good and these lofty goals, but it's also about supporting each other just through all of the tensions of day-to-day life in a better way, because they're all interrelated. So normally in our weekly practice sessions, we actually dovetail from the 30-minute kind of tighter practice into like open space that typically runs a whole other half hour. People kind of drop off when they have to, but we follow all sorts of really interesting themes. Just to kind of, you know, start to tie a bow on today's session, in terms of continuing the conversation, there's kind of like the national and now international resources, techstewardship.com, you know, the practice program. I'll put in the chat here the link to a free registration for the practice program for anyone who wants to check it out. It's a rainforest link. We have the drop-in practice sessions that you can come to. There at different times each week. we're actually partnering with the Energy Futures Lab in Alberta right now to create an energy transition specific version of the tech stewardship program that's coming this summer. If any of you are interested in talking about these opportunities, contact me. Or, there's, as I said, Calgary and the players in the room. So like, Jim and I in like the SATE team, Greg and I in like Inception U, Jeff and Center for Social Impact Tech, James and Mount Royal, like Calgary's had an amazing, like leaders in Calgary's created this, we're just as much creators of this as anyone else. And I would say Calgary is probably at the leading edge of figuring out how to kind of use tech stewardship to connect things and break down silos in Calgary and role model that for other jurisdictions. So that's why I'm super excited to be here today. And maybe I'll invite Jim and Greg to kind of wrap things up before we go to the rainforest, if we have time, just to maybe kind of bridge to some of those efforts that are going on.
Sure. I would say that, with the programs at inception, we are going to, starting with the current cohort, integrate the tech stewardship into the program that they can take throughout the entire program. This is at the very center of everything we should be thinking of. When you first started talking, and Jim, when you were sharing that story about Merlin, and I was thinking about, when I was doing work with the Foundation for Critical Thinking in the United States, they got approached by the intelligence agencies in the United States and said, we'd like you to help us become better at critical thinking. And there was this moment, an adaptive space moment, where it was kind of like, what happens when you make them better at this stuff? And it's one of these things that it is a kind of technology, right? So if you use technology to enable an actor to be better at what they do, and if what that is something that maybe you don't want, that's a really significant thing to think about. And it goes to this whole idea. And by the way, as it turns out, decided to do it. And it actually depoliticized intelligence work in the United States. So actually, I think it's been beneficial. But we talk about this idea of strong sense critical thinking to represent this idea that ethics and stewardship of what's going on is blended together. So it all comes back to this notion of being more meaningful. And there are a lot of challenges in front of us, especially in this province right now around technology. I thought I saw on the website, like maybe a carbon capture and storage container, like there's a huge should we question around that particular technology, right? That's right at the heart of the transition in our province. So we need to make this conversation bigger, and we need to integrate it into people's daily lives. It can't just be something they do as an event. It has to be something that becomes part of their lives, and then thinking about, how do we do that?
Just quickly, and looking at time, Richard, thank you. I want to draw a straight line from the work that, Gary, you and I at the very beginning, and Greg, and this, we started the Rainforest a long time ago, but there's a straight line. There's a straight line from the work that's happening, Bridget, with you and the team up in Edmonton with James and so forth. We have a team that we built here at SAFE. It's called the Catalyst Group, and it embodies, it's Sunita and where's Wumi? They're awesome, and Louie and Megan and Sabrina, and I was blessed with the title called Chief Catalyst. Like, who wouldn't want that title, right? And but I'm blessed with the ability to use that platform to create, use your language, create adaptive spaces within the conversation around a stressed post-secondary environment that's literally seeing its business model evaporate potentially in the next 10 years. And so the rainforest movement that we all got involved with a long time ago and today has direct lines into the change that's happening. And I'm humbled by that, because I kind of carry you guys I do all the time when we talk about the principles of the rainforest as we do change making work at SAFE. And it begins with trust, right? It begins with this idea that we're not going to blow things up, that we are going to have adaptive conversations. And so anyways, I just wanted, it lives on. I haven't been here at Rainforest sessions, but I just want to let you, it lives on. It lives on in every day that I work with this amazing team that I have. So thanks for coming to our new home. It's
Thanks
pretty
for
cool,
having us.
right? It's never felt, well, it's been a while. We had a great session here yesterday, but it's kind of cool. Everyone's kind of walks by here and goes, "Oh, man, what's going on in there?" And so all we have to do is put a bar here and it's over. Thank you so much for sharing our space and I want you to know.
So were you sort of an advisory group to SATE?
No, we're full on part of it. So we report into I'm a AVP reporting into the head of academics. And so we're a team of 6 that is a permanent group responsible for catalytic change across the academic and other parts of SATE, internally and externally.
But not directly with students, but for the overall
Well,
foundation of the organization.
Last night, we had a session with the business students. Yeah,
Yeah.
you're right, exactly. I'm sorry. And we had direct conversations with students about the adaptive conversations and innovation of ways and things in the rainforest. We talked about the social contract yesterday directly to students.
You're kind of like the grain of sand in the oyster, right?
I kind of am.
I think it would be such a wonderful discussion to be able to take out more globally. Because one of the things that I've often looked at is wanting to have like a unity program, because I see the different industries sort of fighting and arguing against each other with, very polar opposite opinions.
Yeah.
And, so we're not necessarily supporting each other as Albertans or Canadian Calgarians or et cetera. And, there's just, there's the put downs, there's the over and kind of overspeak of each other, those kinds of things, without sort of trying to create this understanding of, let's look at it and look at, I think as you were saying, meaningful, not necessarily mechanical responding.
I'll have to
You know,
go. I'm
you know-
sorry. Let's keep that conversation going after. Good final point there. And just want to release the hour. And Mark, thank you so much for your time today and for sharing tech stewardship with us.
Mark, thank you.
We'll have this link in Slack if anyone wants to check out the programming. Thank you again to SAIT, and for those of you who joined us from other schools within SAIT. My husband's here. Hi, Dylan. Yeah, all the catalysts, me, Megan, all of those who support Rainforest very much at an ecosystem level in the back end. On that note, our programming, I don't like that word. Our learning experience, Rainforest Circle, starts tomorrow. So if you had signed up and you haven't filled out your form yet that Megan and Alicia sent out, please get that in. Thanks, Megan. It's going to be a great time and great turnout. And next week, Collectively Tangled, only online. The founders joined us on International Women's Day, and they're going to be sharing their work with us next week around mental health supports for the startup ecosystem. Join us online. It's going to be a great chat with them next Wednesday, only online. No extra complications. So we'll see you then. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Bridget.
Thanks, everyone.
It's all Louis.